The restaurant glowed like something out of a dream, crystal chandeliers glittering above linen-draped tables, soft piano music drifting through the air. Sarah sat at a corner table near the window, twisting the edge of her napkin with nervous fingers. She wasn't used to places like this. The prices on the menu made her stomach tighten, each number reminding her that this one meal probably cost half her week's salary at the bakery. But her best friend Mia had insisted. "You deserve a real date for once, not another guy from the bus stop." Her phone screen lit up. No new messages. She checked the time. 7:40 p.m. Her date was 20 minutes late. Maybe traffic, maybe nerves. Still, every passing minute made her heart sink a little deeper. Around her, couples leaned close, laughing softly, waiters gliding past with trays of wine. Sarah's reflection in the window looked small and uncertain, dark hair tied up neatly, a borrowed blue dress that fit a little too tight at the waist. She'd told herself it was silly to hope, but some part of her wanted this to work. She wanted someone to see beyond the tired eyes and the second-hand clothes. A waiter approached, polite but wary. "Would you like to order while you wait, miss?" She shook her head quickly, cheeks flushing. "I'll just wait a bit longer." He nodded and moved on, though his glance lingered a second longer than it should have. She felt the heat rise to her cheeks. "He thinks I've been stood up," she thought, sinking slightly in her chair. The minutes ticked by, and disappointment began to settle like fog. She could almost hear Mia's voice teasing, "If he's late, he's not worth your lipstick." But Sarah didn't want to give up yet. She stared out the window at the city lights, watching people hurry past in coats and scarves. Her reflection stared back, hopeful, foolish, waiting. Finally, she sighed, reaching for her purse. She'd pay for the untouched glass of water and leave quietly. But just as she stood, a soft, curious voice came from beside her. "Excuse me," it said. Sarah turned, startled. A little girl with chestnut curls and big brown eyes stood there, clutching a small stuffed bunny. Her dress was white, delicate, far too fine for an ordinary dinner out. The girl smiled shyly. "Are you waiting for someone?" And in that simple question, everything began to change. Sarah blinked, caught off guard by the child's sudden presence. The restaurant was no place for a little girl to wander alone, especially one dressed so perfectly. White dress, polished shoes, a pink ribbon in her hair that shimmered in the golden light. The little girl hugged her stuffed bunny close to her chest, her big brown eyes studying Sarah with the kind of honest curiosity only children had. "Yes," Sarah said softly, crouching down to meet her gaze. "I was waiting for someone, but I think he's not coming." She tried to smile, but it faltered halfway. The girl tilted her head, curls bouncing, and frowned slightly as if the thought of someone not showing up was deeply unfair. "That's mean," the girl said simply, pouting. "You look too nice to be left alone." Sarah's laugh came out small but real. "Thank you, sweetheart. That's very kind of you." The girl took a small step closer, peering at her face. "You look like Mommy," she said suddenly. Sarah froze. The air seemed to still around them. "Mommy," she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. The little girl nodded, her tone innocent, matter of fact. "She's in heaven now." She looked down at her bunny for a moment, as if confiding in it. "But you look just like her. Daddy says she had kind eyes too." Sarah's heart tightened. She didn't know what to say. The little girl's words were pure and heavy all at once, the kind that made your chest ache. "You must miss her a lot," Sarah murmured. The girl's lips curved into a soft smile. "I do, but Daddy says she's watching us." Then she leaned in closer, whispering as if sharing a secret. "Sometimes I talk to her at night. I tell her about my drawings and how I want Daddy to smile more." Before Sarah could respond, a shadow fell across the table. A man's voice, low, steady, and gentle, spoke from behind the girl. "Lila," he said, "you shouldn't run off like that." Sarah looked up, and there he was, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a charcoal gray suit that looked perfectly tailored. His presence commanded the space effortlessly, but there was something tired in his eyes, a quiet grief that softened his strong features. The kind of man who'd forgotten how to relax. Lila turned with a grin. "Daddy, she looks like Mommy," she said proudly, pointing to Sarah. The man's gaze followed her finger, and when his eyes met Sarah's, he stopped. Recognition flickered across his face. A faint smile touched his lips, as though he were remembering something distant. "Sarah," he said quietly, almost disbelieving. She blinked, confused. "Do I know you?" He nodded, a glimmer of surprise in his eyes. "You served drinks at the Ward Foundation Gala 3 years ago, didn't you?" Her breath caught. Ward. That name. Ethan Ward. The billionaire CEO her friend had mentioned when setting up the blind date. The man who was supposed to meet her tonight. For a heartbeat, neither of them spoke. Then Ethan's voice broke the silence, gentle, apologetic. "I'm so sorry I'm late." Sarah stood there for a moment, stunned. Her blind date, the man she thought had stood her up, was him. Ethan Ward. The name she'd heard whispered on television, printed in business magazines, attached to billion-dollar deals. And yet, standing in front of her, he didn't look like the untouchable man the world admired. He looked human, a little tired, a little surprised, and, if she wasn't mistaken, a little nervous. "I can't believe this," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're Mr. Ward." Ethan smiled faintly, running a hand through his hair. "Ethan, please. And yes, I'm afraid I'm the very late, very guilty blind date." His tone carried warmth, tinged with embarrassment. A meeting ran over, and then, well, someone got impatient. He glanced down at Lila, who was now carefully arranging her stuffed bunny in an empty chair. "I wanted to see if she was nice," Lila said with a giggle. "She is." Sarah couldn't help but laugh. The tension in her chest eased just a little. "Well, I'm glad I passed the inspection." Ethan looked at her again, his expression softening. "You did more than that." He gestured toward the table. "Please, stay. At least let me make it up to you." Sarah hesitated. Part of her wanted to leave, to escape before she embarrassed herself any further. But then Lila looked up at her with those big brown eyes and whispered, "Please, don't go." That one small word melted every ounce of hesitation. "All right," Sarah said finally, settling back into her seat. "But only if you promise not to miss dessert." Lila clapped her hands. "Daddy never eats dessert." Ethan smiled, the corners of his mouth twitching into a genuine grin. "Maybe tonight's an exception." As dinner began, Sarah found herself relaxing. The conversation flowed easily, surprising even her. Ethan wasn't the arrogant CEO she had imagined. He asked about her work, listened when she spoke, and laughed when she shared stories about the chaos at the bakery. There was no judgment in his eyes, only curiosity and warmth. Lila chimed in between bites of pasta, telling Sarah about her school, her cat named Mr. Whiskers, and how she thought her dad worked, too much for someone who hates meetings. Ethan groaned playfully at that, and Sarah's laughter rang out bright and clear. For the first time in years, Ethan felt the quiet tug of something he hadn't felt since his wife's death, comfort. Watching Sarah and Lila laugh together felt oddly right, as though the universe had aligned for a fleeting moment. When the waiter cleared their plates, Ethan noticed how Sarah carefully reached for her purse, discreetly checking the menu again. "Sarah," he said gently, "it's on me." Her cheeks flushed. "Oh, I didn't mean." "I know," he interrupted softly, his eyes kind. "But I do." For the first time that evening, Sarah met his gaze fully. There was no arrogance in his tone, no pity, just quiet sincerity. And as Lila leaned against her, sleepy and content, Sarah realized that maybe this wasn't just a blind date anymore. Maybe it was the start of something neither of them had expected to find again, hope. The evening had drifted into a kind of soft magic that Sarah hadn't felt in years. The restaurant lights had dimmed, leaving the room bathed in a warm amber glow. Most of the tables were empty now, but Sarah, Ethan, and little Lila lingered, caught in the kind of unspoken comfort that made time feel slower, gentler. Lila sat between them, happily doodling on the back of the menu with a borrowed pen. Her laughter rang out in sweet bursts as she drew wobbly stick figures, Daddy, Sarah, and a tiny version of herself holding both their hands. Sarah smiled at the drawing, her heart tugging softly. "That's beautiful," she said. "You're quite the artist." Lila beamed proudly. "I'm making a family picture," she said. "So Daddy remembers to smile." Ethan looked at his daughter, his face softening in a way Sarah had never seen before. "You think I forget to smile?" he asked, amused. Lila nodded with complete seriousness. All the time. But you're smiling now. Sarah glanced between them, warmth blooming in her chest. It was rare, she thought, to see a man like Ethan, powerful, respected, and yet so disarmed by his child's innocent truth. And even rarer to feel so at ease in his presence. As the waiter returned with the bill, Sarah instinctively reached for her purse again. Ethan stopped her with a gentle shake of his head. Please, he said quietly, it's on me. She hesitated. I don't want to feel like you owe me, he finished softly. His gaze held hers, steady and kind. You don't. Tonight was something I didn't know I needed. Something in his tone made her heart skip. There was vulnerability there, buried beneath years of strength and solitude. She nodded slowly. All right, thank you. When they finally stood to leave, Ethan helped Lila into her coat. The little girl reached up and took Sarah's hand naturally, like it belonged there. Will you come again? She asked sleepily. Next time, we can draw more pictures. And maybe Daddy won't have to work. Sarah smiled down at her. I'd like that. Ethan watched them, silent for a moment, before saying quietly, Lila doesn't usually warm up to people so quickly. Sarah brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. Maybe she just needed someone to listen. He nodded, looking at her as if seeing something he'd been searching for without knowing it. Maybe we both did. Outside, the night air was cool and fragrant with rain. The city shimmered under the streetlights, and the faint hum of traffic filled the silence between them. Ethan opened the door of his sleek black car, then turned to her once more. I'd like to see you again, Sarah. Not as a blind date this time, but as a real one. Her breath caught, a small, uncertain smile forming on her lips. I'd like that too. Just before she stepped away, a tiny voice called from the car window. Bye, pretty lady. Tell mommy in heaven I found her twin. Sarah's eyes stung, a lump rising in her throat. She waved softly. Good night, Lila. As the car pulled away, she stood beneath the soft drizzle, the city lights blurring into gold and silver. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel invisible or alone. She felt seen, by a man who'd lost love and a child who still believed in it. And though she didn't know what tomorrow would bring, one thought stayed with her. Sometimes fate doesn't shout. Sometimes, it arrives in the laughter of a little girl whispering, "You look like mommy."